And now we've revised that down to 1,200 because we understood that we had overestimated. We made a mistake. There were actually bodies that were so badly burnt, we thought they were ours. In the end, apparently, they were Hamas terrorists. When we make a mistake, we admit it.
But before this admission, those deaths were used as evidence of Hamas's brutality and tacit justification for Israel's brutality against the civilians of Gaza. Efforts to investigate what happened to those tragically charred victims, have been thwarted by Israel's choice to bury the bodies and the vehicles together. Now, Jewish burial rites, which favor a speedy burial within 24 hours, were offered as an explanation for quite literally burying the evidence. The Jerusalem Post even reported that the cars may be shredded before being buried in order to maximize space efficiency by compacting the existing vehicles. But the choice to bury the cars was reported more than 6 weeks after October 7th, meaning that the Jewish custom of burying a loved one within 24 hours had long been made moot. Similarly, independent efforts to investigate rape claims have been thwarted by Israel. For example, in the wake of Israel's defense at The Hague genocide trials, in which it emphasized mutilation, rape, and torture, the UN Secretary General has again called for an investigation into these sexual assault claims. But Israel has ordered its health ministry not to cooperate, calling the UN committee anti-Semitic. Israel has also declined to make a tape that it has put together of October 7th atrocities available to the wider public, choosing instead to hold screenings for ideologically aligned parties. One of the few, or perhaps the only non-Zionist invited to these screenings, Owen Jones, reported that the movie contained horrible atrocities, but that it did not show any evidence of rape. What are we to make of the gap between Israel's claims and its interest in investigating those alleged atrocities? And does this pattern of non-disclosure raise a rebuttable presumption that the Hannibal Doctrine is likely to be in effect? A final note, despite representing itself as a free speech platform, efforts to click on Ynet's reporting on the Hannibal Directive story brings up a warning that the article may be, quote, spammy or unsafe. To be clear, Ynet is described as a major Israeli newspaper that, according to a write-up by New York Times journalist Nathaniel Popper at Forward magazine, avoids any overt political position. Yet Musk, for some reason, is deterring people from viewing it. This is soft censorship, and I think it's worth asking what you're being deterred from reading. So people have been talking about this for some time, and it's caused folks like Max Blumenthal, who's been doing a lot of the in-depth reporting into what really happened on October 7th, to be very stigmatized and to get a lot of pretty forceful pushback. And so it was big news when a major Israeli paper seemed to corroborate, not seemed to, but explicitly corroborated claims that this is not just accidental killings in the fog of war, as John Mearsheimer explained, but seemingly a policy to prevent Israel from being in the position of having to negotiate the release of thousands of Palestinians who are imprisoned in Israel before October 7th and now, in exchange for their own Israeli hostages.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be very wary of false claims on both sides, because I know in terms of the helicopter bombing, I don't know if that was that same footage, but there was a viral, seen by like 30 million people clip of a helicopter blowing up supposedly people at the music festival. It turned out that was unrelated to the music festival. It wasn't depicting that. You know, you're assigning a lot of blame here to the Israeli forces in their efforts to root out the terrorist group that have kidnapped all of these people. And again, the primary people at fault obviously are Hamas itself. Hamas should never have done this and should release all the hostages. Do I think Israel should take greater precautions, obviously, than they took in that case where they inadvertently killed those 3 people who were hostages trying to escaping? Of course.
How is it inadvertent? Did an IDF soldier not point a gun and purposefully kill those 3 hostages?
Inadvertent in that they did not mean to kill their own hostages. They did not want to kill their hostages.
I mean, this is the issue, Robbie. I think after particularly that instance, when you had three hostages who had written words in Hebrew on a sheet from where they crawled out from, who are speaking and shouting in Hebrew, who are waving a white flag, who've stripped themselves down so there can be no suspicion that they have weapons on them. One of them, a curly red-headed guy. I mean, there were a lot of indications that these people were Israeli and not Palestinian. Again, not that it should have mattered. Innocent, weaponless, surrendering Palestinians should also not be gunned down in that way. But when something like that happens, and there was a choice to shoot at them and kill them anyway, does that not raise any concerns about what Israeli policy might be with respect to its own hostages?
I just said it raises concerns. But when you're on the ground, going door to door in enemy territory, fearing attacks from the terrorist group at all times, you have a little bit of a hair trigger. Well, that's not to excuse it. There should absolutely be an investigation of what went wrong there, because the protection of the hostage lives is the most important thing. But we now have had reporting. There was a first-person account from a former from a hostage, Agam Goldstein Almog, in the Free Press, describing the horrific conditions. From her view, this is someone, right, who's not saying it on camera while Hamas has a gun to her head, saying that that people hostages have wounds that were not treated, and that girls were sexually molested by the terrorists frequently. That's a first-person account of what's going on. Look,
but she doesn't say she was molested, so it's not a. I mean, it's a first-person account of what's going on, but not a first-person account of what has happened to her.
So you can reject that if you like.
I'm not rejecting it, but that's very similar to the evidence that we've had so far. Does it not strike you as curious that, again, it's not that there couldn't be very plausibly an allegation of discrete sexual violence. Sexual violence is ubiquitous in this world. But what's been alleged is that there was widespread and systemic sexual violence. And despite this allegation that there was widespread and systemic sexual violence, the Israeli police have had to put out a bulletin saying, please, somebody come forward with testimony or evidence, because we're having trouble connecting these allegations that are made by a handful of witnesses that, as we heard in the segment that we did with Max Blumenthal, have been largely discredited as unreliable narrators, attesting to what they witnessed.
Viewers can decide for themselves whether it's discrediting.
There's forensic evidence that is not lining up with the stories that are being alleged. So I understand not taking the word of any given journalist or interlocutor at face value, but there are reports of where bodies were collected from, the age of the victims, and where they were found.
I've seen the footage, by the way. I watched the October 7th footage. You see. There's horrific video of the murders being committed. A father blown apart in front of his two boys. A grenade thrown into an area where people are hiding so that they run out and then that they all get shot. People gunned down in their cars. The conditions of the people at the music festival, bodies everywhere.
That's what Owen Jones attested to. He attested to that, but that these claims of rape were not validated by the video.
Yeah.
So that's the question.
It doesn't matter to me, but...
Well, that's fine, but many of us are interested in finding out the truth of what happened and not just focusing on those facts that happen to paint Israel in a more positive light. There is no question, there is no public dispute that atrocities were committed on October 7th by Hamas, that they killed civilians in contradiction of my own morals and of international law. But isn't it equally important to find out, especially given that the world is deeply invested in the hostages that are still being kept by Hamas and getting free, and to finding out if Israel actually shares the Biden administration's stated objectives of freeing the hostages, or if they feel like the cost to Israel and having to release Palestinian prisoners, who, I gotta say, since you raised the conditions of Israeli prisoners, the statements that have come out of released prisoners in Israel is that, yes, they don't have enough food and their wounds are not treated, because people in Gaza don't have enough food and their wounds have not been treated. What they repeatedly and consistently say is that we ate what Hamas ate and we got the care that Hamas received. They were treated equally as Hamas, and to the extent that the conditions were bad, it's because Israel is denying